Welcome to the Writer Jerk Podcast. I am your host, James Kirst. I am the author of 2 books, Ghosts Are Assholes, published in 2018, and Magic Once Removed, published in 2020. Both books were published by World Castle Publishing, LLC. They are available in several places, including Amazon.com and JamesKirst.com/books, though the links will be provided in the description. I have written approximately 50 short stories, which are also available on JamesKirst.com. If you like any of them or have any constructive criticism, please leave me a comment. My novels mostly focus on paranormal mysteries, urban fantasy, and/or straightforward fantasy, but my short stories tend to gravitate toward horror, slice of life, fantasy, and comedy. Now that the obligatory plugs are out of the way, let's get on with the show. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my first novel, Ghosts Are Assholes. Let's start with a synopsis. Ghosts Are Assholes. If I've learned nothing else from all my years being a medium, at least I know that. They never even thank you for helping them out. Sure, Raquel is beautiful, and sweet, and kind, and promised things would be different, and promised she'd thank me for helping her find peace. She's still a ghost, even if I'm starting to waver a little bit, even if I'm beginning to think this isn't merely my duty, even if I'm starting to have genuine desire to solve the mystery of how and why she died. Even if I'm, for the first time, enjoying having this little curse of mine, I have to remind myself, ghosts are assholes. You know, I know it's ironic that I said in the last podcast that I'd prefer my co-host not to swear, and now I'm talking about a book called Ghosts Are Assholes. But the truth of the matter is I hardly consider assholes to be a swear word in this modern time. You know, I once saw ass as part of a beer name on the side of an 18-wheeler. Which is, you know, why I don't really consider it a swear word anymore. But I have to admit, there were places where I tried to advertise my book and say, you know, my story is called Ghosts Are Assholes. And they censored the ass part. Some even censored the O and holes. So, I don't know, I guess beer has different rules and titles of books. Like, everyone's cool with ass being the name of a beer, but not the name of a story. I don't know what the rules are, but that's why... You know, I hardly consider it a swear word anymore. Anyway, let's talk about the story, not censorship right now. After reading the synopsis, and I told somebody what the story was about, and they said sarcastically, well, even in death, I guess suppose a woman's a damsel. The truth of the matter is, had she read the story, she would have realized that couldn't be further from the truth. Not to spoil too much, but the ghost girl in the story is anything but a damsel. I think a lot of people dismiss the story without giving it much of a chance because of its title. I was at work one time, and an elderly man, you know, he seemed like a good guy otherwise, but, you know, he read the title of the book, and without saying a word, he just gave me a thumbs down and walked off. I was thinking to myself, that's cool. It's just something I worked on and worked very hard on and I'm proud of. Feel free to wholeheartedly dismiss it without giving it a chance. But, you know, even beyond that, I think the problem was people expected an irreverent farce when they instead got an emotional tale full of pathos. At least a few that actually read the story know that it's not just a silly story. There's actually a lot of depth to the characters. There's a lot more depth than you'd expect. There's a lot more emotion than you'd expect. There's a coherent plot. Beyond that, not just coherent, it is a good plot. And I think people were expecting something similar to those mock self-help books that I've seen. Or there was a comic that I heard about. I don't know if it ever got released or made, but somebody was planning on something where the theme was bears are assholes. And then they depict a bunch of pictures where you'd have humorous scenes with a titular animal acting cruel. I don't know if they meant like it was going to be nothing but scenes of bears eating people and attacking people like the Revenant, or whether it was going to be silly things like the bear, you know, maybe giving somebody the bird. Whatever it was, that is not what my book was like at all. I wanted to essentially create an emotional bait and switch. I wanted the reader to get attached to the deuteragonist. And yes, that is a real word. It basically means secondary main character. So after they get attached to this character, I then wanted to break their hearts at the end of the book. Keeping with that theme is the title, which if you've read the book, actually fits the story perfectly, but not for the reasons the reader may expect at first. The truth of the matter is, I don't actually regret titling the story Ghosts Are Assholes. I think it's the right title. I even love how the story is bookended with the same opening and closing lines. However, because of the title, I don't think people gave it a chance, which is a shame because it is a really good story in my opinion. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have written it. But I just think, there's something there that's a little bit more than just sort of like a joke or a farce. Not that there's anything wrong with making jokes or a farcical story or anything like that. I just think my story was so much more, and I just wish people gave it more of a chance. As far as my inspiration was concerned, I have to admit, it was meant to initially be a silly short story. I basically was thinking to myself, reading other ghost stories about how ghosts were making noises randomly, or keeping people up at night, or, just doing disruptive things to people's lives, and I kind of chuckled to myself thinking, God, ghosts are assholes. And that was kind of the germination of how the story began. I have to admit, when I first created my character, I don't think his name was Vincent. I don't think the woman was named Raquel. One of the things is that the name of the character was completely different at first because I was basing the characters off of this one story I read where one young woman murdered another young woman for quote-unquote stealing her boyfriend or something like that. I think it was one of those things where, one girl was crazy and the other girl didn't steal her boyfriend. That's kind of where some of the inspiration lied as well with this tale, but the character started to change. The character Vincent he didn't really get along with his mother in the first draft, let's just put it that way, and was a little bit more sarcastic about her personal life, that sort of thing. There's a more cynicism in the story initially rather than the sort of naive character that I created contrary. The thing is that I'm the type of writer that doesn't really begin a story or know where he is going with the story until he knows the ending. And in this case, after really struggling with the beginning, struggling with how I should start the story, I had sort of a little bit of an idea in mind. I thought, okay, until I know where this story is going, I can't really write anything, right? So I thought, I'm going to write the ending first, and then we'll go from there. I don't always write the ending first with my stories, but I always know where I'm going. I always know what the ending more or less is going to be. And admittedly, most of the time, I don't write the ending at the end of the story. So I don't go from beginning to end, everything chronologically. I usually write the end to begin the writing process or sometime during the middle. Rarely do I go chronologically. Here's the first chapter. I'm going to start from the first chapter into the last chapter. So in this story, I wrote the ending, near the beginning of the writing process. I wrote it when I was just starting out. And then when I wrote the ending, I kept getting these ideas and it got more and more emotional and it became more and more sentimental. It became more of a serious tale as opposed to just a bunch of jokes. And then from there, I thought, I'm going to have to rewrite the characters. I'm going to have to rewrite the story a bit because this is now an emotional, moving tale as opposed to just a bunch of nonsense and just a bunch of silliness. This is going to be an actual story at this point and a good story. So that's kind of where I went with it. At first Ghosts Are Assholes was intended to just be a silly short story that I wrote for jamescurse.com, and then it kind of grew from there. It doesn't often happen like that. Sometimes my short stories just stay short stories, but this one was different. This one was something that I was really, really happy with when I finished it. I do want to add something else. One of the themes that I wanted to incorporate in the story is the theme of loneliness. I'm not sure if people really got that, the few people that did read the book. But, one of the things is like Vincent is living alone. He doesn't have a wife, a girlfriend, or really any friends. This is a really lonely guy. I try to incorporate things like people playing Uno, Solitaire, that sort of thing, the card games. I know Uno is a multiplayer game. I know that. It's just that I like the name and I like the sort of symbolism of it. Even the ghost girl Raquel was alone in the events prior to the story, before everything happened. She was sort of a lonely person and the ghost was alone for a while. Also, the fact that Peter was lonely made him easier to manipulate. He feels companionship and just a bit of companionship. And it breaks through his defenses a bit and he starts to lead the reader towards perhaps feeling that his angst towards ghosts are unwarranted. And then we have it all reaffirmed at the end. Not to spoil too much, but the character starts to feel his defenses start to fall a bit. And maybe partly because, he never had real companionship outside of his mother, of course, because he lives a sort of detached life. He's a private investigator who mostly does ghost work. With ghosts, he meets for who knows how long, and they are all selfish and want their own goals met rather than ever getting to know him. So, he's kind of a lonely person. He had a girlfriend that he didn't really connect with, so he's alone at this point, right? I kind of wanted him to think, you want the reader to think maybe, he's just being cruel for no reason. And then, no, there's some truth to what he's saying. Ghosts really are assholes. But, I kind of thought, well, the character then in the future is going to only grow more lonely and bitter, which is why I kind of threw him a bone in the epilogue, where a random ghost he doesn't even know thanks him for the simple act of telling him the results of the World Series. I know it's a silly note to end on, but it's one that I feel is important because it kind of signifies that kindness can come from anywhere, even the most unexpected places. I'm also saying you shouldn't give up just because your previous experiences were poor. I'm trying to just kind of tell Vincent and everybody who's like Vincent, there's always kindness to be found. It just might not come where you're looking for it. But yeah, I have to admit, it's kind of a funny note to end on as well. And one of the things I want to point out with this story is that Vincent goes from calling the ghost girl, Raquel, a ghost and other synonyms for ghost. I had like tons of synonyms for ghost that I called her. But as the story goes along, he starts calling her more affectionate names until it's like Raquel, my friend, and that sort of thing. And then back to ghost at the end, like just he's bitter again. And, that's the symbolism I was going for. And, if you didn't notice that when you read the story, if you did read the story and missed it, please reread it again, and maybe then you see like, oh, that was cute. I see why he did that now, because there was a purpose to everything. And I think that's one of the things people get from writers. They know this, but they don't always consciously realize it. Most of the time, writers have a reason for doing some of the things, like I said with the ghost and making intentionally the synonyms to more warmer names until he's calling her by her name and her friend, and then back to ghost. Now, sometimes too, I have to admit, sometimes you stare into the abyss too long and you start staring at the story and try to interpret every line. Sometimes the authors are just throwing things and seeing what works, but I did some things intentionally like that. Anyway, that's it for now. I have a lot more to say about this story, but I think those are like the key things, and I think if I had a co-host, we could get into a discussion and I can talk even more. Who knows, this might be a topic that I expand to a half-hour or hour podcast, but for now, I think that's a good little behind-the-scenes look of the story Ghosts Are Assholes. Until next time, this has been James Kirst, the Writer Jerk, now signing off. Halloween is rapidly approaching, and what better way to celebrate the season of ghosts and witches than buying my books, Ghosts Are Assholes and Magic Once Removed, available on Kindle and paperback, on Amazon, the Barnes & Noble website, and a boatload of other places. The links will be provided in the description. If horror is your thing, go to the horror page on jameskirst.com for a plethora of horror short stories, including the Fang series. If horror isn't your thing, still go to the jameskirst.com site as well, as I've written a variety of other types of short stories. Also, if you don't like horror, don't let it dissuade you from picking up one of my novels. Ghosts Are Assholes and Magic Once Removed aren't really horror, even though they star traditional horror villains, albeit in much different roles than they are traditionally depicted. They are more mysteries and adventure tales with supernatural elements. Please pick up both today. Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and comment both here and the jameskirst.com page if you've enjoyed. Talk to you soon.